Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and this is the archives of the Most Detailed Breakdown series. This is basically where things that I often repeat in Most Detailed Breakdowns can be explored fully as something of a reference point to be used in tandem with the Most Detailed Breakdowns. This means that in the future, when I do Most Detailed Breakdowns that have repeated information from one video to another, rather than going into extraneous detail on those particular points, I will simply direct you to a video like this one, where you'll be able to find full extrapolations of the respective aspects of the Most Detailed Breakdown that I'm explaining at the time. To give examples, in many of my Most Detailed Breakdowns surrounding ships of the UNSC and the Covenant, there are a lot of aspects that are mirrored from one ship to another. For example, the Titanium A armour for UNSC ships from one ship to another may be almost identical with only small differences. In future Most Detailed Breakdowns, I will touch upon the Titanium A armour. I will explain any differences there are in that particular ship's Titanium A armour versus other ships, but then we'll directly reference you to a video pertaining to the Titanium A armour, so you can have a full exploration of the specifics of Titanium A armour in a separate narrative video. So with that in mind, let's look at the archive surrounding Titanium A armour, a mainstay of shipbuilding for the UNSC. The exact alloy of titanium is still unclear. Titanium A plating is the major quoted titanium alloy used by the UNSC, but there is no clarification on the exact nature of it. All we know for certain is that the primary titanium mined is a high-grade form of titanium called titanium 50. This simply means that there are 50 subatomic particles made up of 22 protons and 28 neutrons within the atomic nucleus, totaling the 50 subatomic particles, and that it is molecularly strengthened to more suitably fulfill its role as armour plating. I believe I can deduce more than this by its characteristics, material properties, and understood and established methods of metallurgy. There is passing reference that this permutation of titanium is ablative in nature, meaning that when hit by plasma weapons, material from the armour vaporizes, chips, or is otherwise eroded away from the surface to negate the penetrative effects of the projectile in question, carry heat away from the ship, and protect the inner, more essential and vulnerable areas of the ship by sacrificing sections of the armour local to the impact site. This may be where Titanium A armour gets the A in its name, A standing for ablative. Obviously, at this time, precious little information is actually available about the particular material properties of Titanium A armour, so I have endeavoured to analyse it and proposed viable ways that Titanium A armour could be developed. Obviously, if new law comes out that gives more information in this regard, I will revisit this assessment completely, and hell, I wouldn't be against 343 Industries themselves using my analysis to add to the law if they saw fit. But let's get to grips with Titanium A armour. Given the described performance of the armour plating regarding its ductility, suggested atomic mass and density, its thermal properties as well as its shear strength and a handful of other parameters, I can say with a high degree of certainty that the alloy in question is an alloy called grade 38 titanium. This is where titanium is alloyed with 4% aluminium, 2.5% vanadium and 1.5% iron, which reduces the amount of vanadium needed as a beta stabilizer. The specifications of such is good cold workability and higher atomic density, leading to superior ductility, which enables the plating to locally deform when struck by a high velocity projectile, rather than cracking completely, but also being very tolerant to high temperatures before structural integrity is compromised. This at least ascertains the specific alloy and grade of titanium for the armour plating based on the law and the properties of specific alloys to meet the prerequisites of battleship armour plating. So, the specific permutation of titanium will be mined, refined from ore, and mixed with alloy materials in order to attain grade 38, and then forged into plates. There is more to it than just this. In regards to its molecular strengthening, I believe this can be achieved via an alpha-beta phase alloy. Various heat treatments as well as very precise purification processes all help towards the properties of this alloy. Let's explore alloy phases a little bit first. The phase is simply the term used to describe the atomic structure of the alloy. With titanium, atoms of titanium align within the metal into an either hexagonal close-packed crystalline structure, which is called the alpha phase, or a body-centered cubic structure, called the beta phase. The specifics of what phase the titanium alloy is in is highly dependent upon the heat treatments of the alloy, and the heat treatments themselves impart very specific properties into the alloy and affect the phase in turn. Titanium alloys are heat treated for a number of reasons, the main ones being to increase strength by solution treatment and aging, as well as to optimize special properties such as fracture toughness, fatigue strength, and high temperature creep strength. But it is also highly dependent on the alloy phase. Now, going back a bit earlier, I postulated that the titanium A armor is an alpha-beta phase alloy. Titanium alloys are divided into 4 classes: commercially pure, alpha, alpha-beta, and beta. Each class has distinctive characteristics. Pure titanium, although very ductile, has low strength and is therefore used when strength is not critical and corrosion resistance is desired. The alpha alloys are weldable and have good elevated temperature strengths, but cannot be dramatically changed by heat treatment such as tempering. The alpha-beta alloys are widely used because of their good combination of strength, toughness, and formability. The beta alloys are used where very high tensile strengths are required. Commercially pure titanium most definitely does not fit into the criteria of the in-game armor plating. Alpha alloys cannot be adversely affected by heat treatments, ruling out this phase for the titanium A armor, and beta alloys are only needed when high tensile strengths are required, and since tensile strength is a property of a material under tension or stretching, this doesn't necessarily meet the requisites of armor plating, whereby impact and shear strength are much more desirable. This leaves the alpha-beta alloys, which are metastable and generally include some combination of both alpha and beta stabilizers, and which can be heat treated, thereby adding additional desirable properties. By working as well as heat treatment of alpha-beta alloys below or above the alpha-beta transition temperature, large microstructural changes can be achieved. This may impart a substantial hardening of the material. Solution treatment plus aging is used to produce maximum strengths in alpha-beta alloys. Also, other heat treatments, including stress relief heat treatments, are practiced for this group of titanium alloys as well. So we now have our phase locked in. So to recap, we now have a titanium 50 grade 38 alpha-beta phase alloy for the principal material of titanium A armor. So now we'll look at the specifics of the heat treatments that the armor plating will go through to achieve the needed properties. Titanium alloy will be annealed, whereby the alloy is heated into the upper end of the alpha-beta range, held for a time, and then cooled very slowly. This also assists in recrystallization and serves primarily to increase the fracture toughness, ductility at room temperature, dimensional and thermal stability, and creep resistance. This would have the effect of making the plate much tougher and less likely to crack upon impact, while also ensuring it remains ductile enough to locally deform, thereby absorbing kinetic energy of an impact over a greater distance, time, and area, while also ensuring that the plate maintains its shape and properties, even when heated by energy-based weapons. Next, stress relieving is the treatment of a metal or alloy by heating to a predetermined temperature below its lower transformational temperature, followed by cooling in air. The primary purpose is to relieve stresses that have been absorbed by the metal from processes such as forming, straightening, machining, and rolling, all of which being processes the armour plating would likely go through in the production process. It will then be precipitation hardened, also called age hardening or particle hardening. It's a heat treatment technique used to increase the yield strength of malleable materials and relies on changes in solid solubility with temperature to produce fine particles of an impurity phase which impede the movement of dislocations or defects in the crystal's lattice. Since dislocations are often the dominant carriers of plasticity, this serves to harden the material. Now, to break this down, within any material there is a grain structure, which is effectively where the atoms of the material arrange into an ordered grid. Now, these ordered grids can be consistent throughout the entire material, a state known as a single crystal superalloy. Or, as with most materials, there will be small islands of ordered matrices of atomic structure, all bunched together into a disordered phase matrix. These individual islands, or crystals, are what we call the grain of a material, and where these grains meet is known as a grain boundary. And since these grains don't align perfectly, the atomic bonds at these grain boundaries is substantially weaker than the rest of the material, meaning that if the material does go under unusually high stresses, if there's any place that is going to fail, it's going to be at these grain boundaries. And while one workaround would be to make the entire material a single crystal superalloy, for plates as large as titanium A armour on the side of a ship, this would be impractical to say the least. An easier way to fix this is to introduce impurity into the phase matrix, basically small atoms of other stable materials, into these grain boundaries that effectively stop these dislocations between the grain boundaries from slipping. In a similar manner to putting a filler into a crack in a wall to stop the crack from spreading, impurities can be introduced to the dislocations in the grain boundaries to stop them from moving. The reason this is called age hardening is because, generally speaking, these impurities will be introduced naturally into any material over time. We're simply engineering it to happen under a much shorter time span. Further to this, titanium dioxide dissolves in the metal at high temperatures, and its formation is very energetic. These two factors mean that all titanium except the most carefully purified has a significant amount of dissolved oxygen. In fact, it could even be considered a titanium-oxygen alloy. Oxide precipitates offer some strength but are not very responsive to heat treatments and can substantially decrease the alloy's toughness. So another molecular strengthening technique that may be used by the UNSC may be the removal of oxygen and oxides from the alloy by use of deoxidizers or reductants. How the UNSC go about performing this task isn't immediately apparent. So now we have a deoxidized titanium-50 grade 38 alpha-beta phase alloy with age hardening. All of these processes and properties are currently very well established mechanisms of alloy production and processing that are used across the world right now. I would now go a step further, but at this point I implore you to understand that this is most definitely moving out of the realms of real-world techniques and very much into the hypotheticals of material properties under extreme conditions. While informed by known principles of science, it is still abstract enough to be worth mentioning at this point. But again, given that it is the 26th century in the Halo universe at the moment, it is entirely plausible that new techniques and technologies have come into place to allow what I'm about to extrapolate on to actually happen. The next thing I would suggest could go a way to fully fleshing out titanium A armour is the implementation of gravitics to induce a super hardening and hyperdensity to the alloy in question. We already know that the UNSC and humanity at large have a good grasp of gravitics, or the control of gravity. They have gravity generators on ships, gravity generators in more modern repulsion drives, gravity generators to keep frigates hovering in atmosphere, and even anti-gravitic children's games such as gravball. It stands to reason then that there is a possibility of employing extremely powerful gravitic fields when forging materials to grant them properties and characteristics far in advance of their normal specifications. We have only ever created materials under the influence of the gravity of Earth, one standard G. But in extremely powerful gravitic fields, matter can achieve some phenomenal properties. Neutron stars are the collapsed cores of supermassive stars. Under the extreme force of gravity, matter is crushed so closely together that a single teaspoon of a neutron star would weigh around 1 billion tons. This is obviously an extreme case, but forging a material under tens of Gs or even hundreds of Gs could have adverse effects to the material properties. A good analogue of this is found in carbon. A crystalline form of carbon, known as graphite, is a very flaky, dull black, metallic looking material with a hardness between 1 and 3 on the Mohs hardness scale. Under extreme pressures and high temperatures, graphite forms into diamond, a completely transparent, perfectly ordered crystalline matrix of carbon with a Mohs hardness of 10, being one of the hardest naturally occurring substances in existence. Using this analogue, whereby the pressure is replaced with artificial gravity gradients and the temperature is as a consequence of the material being white hot or molten while being forged, a titanium alloy could undergo a significant change in its material properties under these conditions. The only limiting factors being how much gravity can be generated and focused, not bridging the gap between hyperdensity and fusion, and the properties persisting even after the armour has been forged, applied to ship and cycles from immense artificial gravity fields to near 0G in space. Although there is yet another way that extreme properties could be achieved to a similar end, but without such extreme forces required, and that is through the process of internal crystalline tension. A Prince Rupert drop is a small bead of molten glass that is cooled extremely quickly in water. The outer surface of the molten glass cools nearly instantly, hardening and establishing its crystalline grain structure, while the centre of the drop remains molten for a time, now being insulated from the cold water by the now solid outer shell. As the core of the glass cools and hardens, it contracts, pulling the outer shell inwards, but since the outer shell has already solidified, it remains in place, instead undergoing an internal tension force, imparting a mechanical force on the glass's crystalline structure from the inside. The result is that the teardrop head of a Prince Rupert's drop can be struck multiple times with a large hammer and will not break. However, if the tail of the drop is broken, internal stresses release explosively, causing the drop to shatter instantly. Under the right hypothetical conditions, a section of armour plating could undergo a similar process and induce an internal tension within the crystalline matrix, while also purposefully working around the weakness of having these internal stresses exploited, resulting in a near explosive failure of the plate. I would suggest doing so would only be possible in a single crystal superalloy, whereby the atomic structure of the alloy would be a perfectly ordered matrix of atoms throughout the entirety of the material, and as far as cooling, it would need to be cooled, at least the outside, from white hot to close to absolute zero extraordinarily quickly for any of these properties to even have a chance at forming. Both the artificial gravity properties and the internal tension force treatments are completely hypothetical, and there is no supporting law to suggest that these are in place. They are just simply examples of how the material properties of titanium A armour could be augmented to stand up to the punishment we see it take in universe, while still being seated somewhat in the principles of material science. Finally, for titanium A armour plating, although not directly related to the material properties themselves, the space between the armour plates is filled with shear thickening fluids, which are non-Newtonian fluids, containing suspended particles of ceramic. When a shear force is exerted against the fluid, the particles within the fluid form an almost instantaneous crystalline matrix, hardening the fluid to 98% of the mechanical strength of the associated ceramic material in the blink of an eye, thereby acting as a liquid armour, the induced crystalline matrix now relaxing and returning to its normal viscosity nearly immediately afterward. This fluid also has an encapsulated healing agent to reduce sprawl from impacts and automatically seal hull breaches. This is all contained within a cellular hexagonal material that can be simply laid and attached to connection points within the inner hull surface. The plates are also generally embedded with thermal superconducting radiators to more efficiently transfer the heat generated by the ship into space. Unfortunately, this feature doesn't seem to benefit the ship at all in reverse. When the plate is struck by sufficiently large plasma weaponry, the plates heat up and, in particularly sustained attacks, can become molten and boil away. The radiators do not help in dissipating the heat taken on board by the plasma bombardment, and generally the plates radiate this heat back into space gradually. But this is also accompanied by the internal air temperature spiking considerably in areas close to the impact zones of plasma. In fact, in some cases, since atmosphere or air is more thermally conductive than the vacuum of space, plasma bombardment to the outer surface of a ship's hull can result in air temperatures inside, very close to the impact site, spiking to lethal levels, capable of burning the occupants almost immediately. It is also briefly referenced that tungsten may be layered with the titanium A armour to augment its radiation shielding rating to a 5, and I assume make it tougher to kinetic energy penetrators and plasma weapons. There is still, even now, so much mystery surrounding titanium A armour. In this video, I believe I have assessed the capabilities of titanium A armour plating used on UNSC ships and applied reasonable principles to ascertain the specifics of this miraculous armour plating. Titanium A armour appears to be a titanium 50 grade 38 alpha-beta phase alloy with age hardening, with the possibility of internal tension and gravitics being viable ways to further augment its properties. Again, should new law emerge that suggests otherwise, I will amend my assertions. And if 343 Industries are looking at adding to the law and looking at viable ways that they could do it, this assessment is certainly a way it could be done. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below, I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members Neek the Silent Cartographer, Siphonic Storm and Todd Morrison, my Tier 0 Transcendients, Brian, Sebastian, Darian, Red Sea, Stalk of the Realms, Falcon X003, Starlight, Alvin, Flaming Halo, Josh, Legions Lost, Kyle, Cat Erdicam, Schneidish, Leon, Ignizzle, Chris, Cooper, Prophet, and Devon, the holders of the mantle, my glorious reclaimers, my loyal metarchs, and all the other patrons and YouTube members that have jumped aboard to support the channel. Much love to you guys, thanks so much for your support, it's keeping things happening and helping development of the channel and future awesomeness in a big way. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit that subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Be sure to support us on all major social media channels, including Discord, and if you really love the channel, consider heading over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there, or jumping on as a channel member. It means the world to me and affords you loads of great perks and bonuses, while also helping work towards some awesome stuff in the near and distant future. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.